Today's coaching conversation has really captured your attention, and I had a quick look before I joined the session today, and we had over 300 people register for today's topic. Now, that's a record breaker. We're usually around sort of 220, 250, but over 300, which is fascinating. And I know many more of you will be watching our live stream Facebook, and many more of you will be watching the recording and the playback via our YouTube channel. So I want to take the opportunity, before I introduce my wonderful guest, just to thank all of you, because without you, coaching conversations wouldn't exist. So I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for your interactions and your energy and everything else, and your enthusiasm. And also thank my guests as well. And all for the wonderful feedback that I receive each month from you guys in my inbox, and saying how much you enjoy the session. So thank you, and long may that continue in 2024. So today's guest is no stranger here to the Coaching Academy, and also not a stranger to coaching conversations either. Now, my guest today is Coaching Academy trainer on GR and OW, Sarah Bramall. She also delivers the fantastic career niche coaching, amongst loads of other things, and supervision, through our supervision page as well. So Sarah is an ICF Accredited Coach to ACC level. I know she's going for a PCC level this year. She's also co-founder of the Coaching Catalysts. And Sarah specialises in leadership, executive coaching, career and confidence coaching, and is also someone that I am privileged to call a personal friend. Sarah and I met before our Coaching Academy days. And today, with the help of Sarah, I'm going to be exploring the fascinating world of imposter syndrome. So let's dive straight in, and welcome, lovely Sarah, and Happy New Year to you. For those of you who don't know you, that are here today, can you just start by me asking you a little bit about your journey so far, your coaching journey, where it all started for you?
Oh, Sharon, thank you so much for the lovely welcome and the invitation to be here with you today. And Happy New Year to all of you. It's wonderful to see so many lovely familiar faces, and lots of you who are new here today as well. It's a real pleasure to kick off the new year here with you today. So Happy New Year, and let's go. So thank you, Tracy. Where did it all start? Well, for those of you who don't know my journey and my story, I was a teacher for 18 years before I transitioned into coaching. I loved teaching. I taught secondary English, media, drama, and I thought that I would be in teaching for all of my career, until I came across coaching on a leadership course. And one of the exercises was to take part in coaching triads. And as I was coaching, the two other ladies that I was working with just kind of stopped the conversation and just went, "Oh my goodness, Sarah, you're really good at this." And when they said that, I kind of knew that it wasn't just flattery, that there was something genuine there. And it planted a seed that made me think, okay, there's something here. Let me investigate this. And so then I was drawn in by the Facebook ads from the Coaching Academy and went along in 2016 to the Coaching Academy. And that time it was in person, the free 2-day event. And I had been in the building for all of 5 minutes. And I was like, oh my goodness, I feel like a light bulb has turned on. I want to be here. I want to be a coach. And I secretly also knew that I wanted to be a trainer. So now when I look back from 2024, I'm like, wow, my goodness, all of those dreams have come true. What a privilege to be here. So I transitioned out of the classroom in 2019. And then I think I joined the training team around 2021, as Sharon said, stepping in to take on the GR and OW training on the life coaching diploma.
Yeah, fantastic. And it has been such an incredible journey. And it's been really lovely to, to interact with you. And I know you've got some fantastic ideas that you're bringing to the table as well. So I'm looking forward to working with you on that as well. So today's topic, as I alluded to right at sort of like the start, is such a popular one. And going by today's numbers, it must come up a lot in coaching and maybe also in our own personal development. Can you just start by just explaining, maybe for, just for clarity, really, what do we mean by imposter syndrome? What is it?
So firstly, Sharon, thank you for the question. Imposter syndrome is a really tricky term because it's not a clinical condition, right? It's a psychological phenomenon. And I don't love the word either imposter because it gives the impression of sort of being a trickster or a fraud or not belonging. I don't love the word syndrome because it gives the impression that there's something wrong with you, and that's absolutely not the case. But what it is it's a psychological phenomenon whereby you feel like a fraud, you feel like you're not good enough to be here, and that one day somebody is going to find out. And that feeling often comes or is expressed in coaching because that feeling can often be triggered when we have either recently made a change, so maybe for a client who has recently gained promotion or is looking to make a change, and that feeling of growth or of doing something different or stepping outside of the comfort zone can really bring up those feelings of imposter syndrome.
Thank you. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because like syndrome, you're right. You're sort of like, oh, okay, so it must be something to do with like a medical. That's what we sort of associate that word. So it's a little bit confusing, I think.
Yeah, it's not a very helpful term. And if I had a magic wand and could change the term, absolutely would do. But I think it's important to address that first off.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Now, I have, as I know you do, Sarah, every year I have a new little sort of coaching book. So I've got my coaching journal here, which I will be taking notes on because every day is a learning day. And I learn so much from all of my guests that come every month on coaching conversations. Now, Sarah, before I would dive in about, recognizing it and everything, I thought it might be quite useful just to sort of something that we started to sort of have a chat about sort of generally before we went live. And one of the reasons why I wanted to interview you on imposter syndrome for our very first coaching conversations of 2024 is because although it's not exclusively around, sort of beginning of the year and all of that sort of, setting new goals, it sort of made sense that if we're going to set stretch goals, if our clients are setting goals, and if we as coaches are setting ourselves goals, because we are walking our talk, that we might have a little bit more awareness, or need to have even a more awareness of imposter syndrome and what it is and why it might happen. So would you agree that imposter syndrome and goal setting might sort of almost go hand in hand?
Absolutely, because again, when we are making a change and we're aiming for something new, that's when imposter syndrome is likely to come up for us. So for lots of you here, I'm guessing you're going to be looking to qualify as a coach, or you might be looking to launch your business or maybe increase your presence on social media. And that is going to stretch you, and that imposter syndrome is going to come up. So it's very, very relevant, you're right, to talk about it at this time of the year. And I think that there's a distinction to be made though here with imposter syndrome, because the difference with imposter syndrome is when it's pervasive, when it's repetitive, when it's starting to impact you because it's a kind of a thought pattern that you're really struggling to shake. One thing that I have learned through stretching myself and challenging myself and tuning into this voice of the imposter is actually one thing that we can do is we can start to go, is that imposter syndrome? Or actually, can I reframe this as being a sign of growth? Because when we go to grow and change, that feeling of fear is going to come up for us. But actually, we can coach ourselves often around that and go, okay, it feels really hard now. It feels really hard to come on to a Zoom conversation and speak to 152 people. But I know that with time and with practice, I know that this process will get easier. So that's maybe a first learning point to take away, is to go, is this imposter syndrome? Or actually, is this a new challenge with a growth phase? And can I coach myself to see how this is going to get easier with time and practice?
I think that's a really good point, actually, Sarah, and it reminds me of sort of a personal example. Actually, I think it's relevant to share that. And as you know, Sarah, I'm currently almost finished, but I'm currently doing a level 7 ILM master's equivalent in executive coaching. And I almost didn't do it, almost didn't do it, because my imposter syndrome was saying, this is a master's level. You haven't even got a degree, Sharon. You didn't leave school with A levels. Those of you that have been on my belief session, you would have heard this story. So it was tapping me on the shoulder and saying, you know, who the hell do you think you are, being able to do a master's equivalent? You know, I've been a qualified coach since 2009. I know my stuff. I've done over 800 hours of paid coaching hours. So it wasn't the experience at all. It wasn't that I lacked experience. But it was interesting how it was almost like, no, stay in your comfort zone, just do the level 5. And it was interesting. It was just, I was talking it through with Louise, our head of qualifications here. And she said, Sharon, you know, you've already got the equivalent of a level 5. Why are you staying in your comfort zone? You're more than capable of doing the level 7. Go for it. You know, what's the worst that can happen? So it's really interesting. I possibly would have stayed in a nice little comfy, absolutely no stretch at all, and done the level 5 if I hadn't have spoken to somebody who was almost inadvertently, she sort of championed me to, it's like, go on, it's like the mother hen, isn't it, pushing the chicks out of the nest. Go on, you can do it, off you go and fly. Is that something that you've recognized at all, Sarah?
Absolutely, Sharon. And just firstly, just to sort of affirm that for you, you know, well done you for being that person who continues to stretch and to grow and to not let that get in your way. But also to Louise for being that person that, you know, sees the potential in you and challenges you. And I think that's so important for all of us to know that in our networks, we've got other people, we're surrounded by people who've also got big ambitions and big goals, because we need those people to say, hey, do you know what, I believe in you, this is possible, and also to challenge us when we do put those blocks in our own way. And has it come up for me, Sharon? Yes, 100%. So as you shared at the beginning, I this year, one of my goals is to achieve my PCC ICF accreditation, which again it feels really stretchy at the moment. I'm not going to lie. It really does feel like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a leap and this is going to be a challenge. And there is that voice that's going, what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough, etc. But I now know enough, first of all, to recognize that when that voice comes up, to go, it's okay, I've got this, and I can talk more about that, coaching that voice later. And also to know again that it's a phase. This is a learning zone. This is a stretch zone. It's meant to feel stretchy. It's meant to feel challenging, because if it doesn't feel like that, we're not learning, we're not growing. Where it becomes problematic is if you're kind of waking up every day going, oh, I really shouldn't be doing this. You know, I don't deserve to be here. Somebody's going to call me out and say, hey, Sarah, what are you doing coaching? What are you doing training? What are you doing supervising? That's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and it's important to recognise that. It's funny, what occurred to me whilst you were talking about that is the whole Timothy Galway coaching equation, you know, performance equals potential minus interference. And he talks about the biggest opponent, because it was all about tennis, wasn't it? The inner game of tennis. Not being the other side of the net, but our biggest opponent being the one that's inside our heads. And, you know, that fits so well with what we're talking about today, because, you know, I could have quite easily have talked myself out of that. And there's been other goals, you know, in the early part of my coaching career, you know, when I've just sort of launched my fledgling coaching business, you know, where I could have quite easily have talked myself out of not bidding for a contract with my local authority, or not taking on, you know, sort of working with a CEO of a local company, etc., etc. And it's interesting for me over those years that I've noticed that it doesn't matter whether, you know, it might be a young person going for maybe a particular course that they're looking to do, or joining a new club, or whether it's a CEO, you know, or a member, a board member. It affects everybody at each level, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. And I think that's important to recognize as well, that it's not, it doesn't discriminate achievement or ability or even experience. And we've got some really great examples from people like Michelle Obama, who's spoken really publicly about her imposter syndrome. And actually the way that she has managed to reframe it is by looking, you know, having lots of experience talking to lots of different world leaders in different contexts, thinking, actually, do you know what? When I look at them, I put them on a pedestal, but they're human too. I think her phrase was, they're not that smart, but you know, they're human too. Sheryl Sandberg as well, who was the CEO of Facebook, when she, you know, she said, despite the sort of high level of her role, she said, there are still days when I feel like a fraud. I'm not sure that I should be where I am. And also Tom Hanks. I don't know if you guys, I love Tom Hanks. He's such an incredible actor, but he's spoken about it as well, that he thinks that, you know, he has those moments where he's like, whoa, how did I get here? When are they going to find out that actually I'm a fraud? So it's not something where we can kind of wave a magic wand and it goes away. But what we can do as coaches is start to recognize those signs and start to reframe them.
Brilliant. So, so important. So you spoke about recognizing them. So how do we recognize imposter thoughts and the impact of them?
So I think, first of all, Sharon, having the language and having the conversation. And if I can, let me just take you back in time. So my first experience of imposter syndrome was back in 2002, when I just started as a teacher and I was promoted really, really quickly. And I remember still very, very vividly walking down the corridor at school, actually like imagining that somebody was literally going to come up and tap me on the shoulder and go, really sorry, but we've made a mistake and you really shouldn't be here. You know, you shouldn't be allowed to teach children and you shouldn't be allowed to do what you're doing. And I didn't know anything at that time about imposter syndrome. I was in my very early 20s. And it wasn't until a colleague just really by chance, we were sitting there one evening doing our marking, and he just kind of went, oh, do you ever get that feeling that you've somehow got here by accident and that you shouldn't really be here and somebody's going to find out? And I was like, oh my goodness, somebody else is thinking the same thoughts that I'm thinking. And even then, I didn't have a word for it. It's probably years and years later that I actually knew that it was a thing and that it was called imposter syndrome. So I'm so grateful now that we're having this conversation, because the more that we have a conversation, the more we're curious about each other and imposter syndrome and when it's come up for us and when it affects us and how we respond. Knowledge is power. And it never fails to amaze me with coaching clients that, you know, for us in the coaching world, maybe imposter syndrome is very much kind of in the conversation. But for lots and lots of people out there, it might be something that they've sort of heard passing reference to, but maybe not related it to themselves. And it might be that although maybe they've recognized, maybe they have got imposter syndrome, the coaching conversation might be the very first time that they felt comfortable enough to be able to name it and talk about it and talk about how it's affecting them. Because again, imposter syndrome often affects high achievers. And so when you're in a position where you're in a, you know, a high achieving role, whatever that is, it's really hard to go, oh, do you know what? I'm not really sure I should be here. It's a really difficult conversation to have. So that's why the coaching space is so important for this.
Yeah, and you sort of adding to what you were just saying, Sarah, it's about, so who can I trust with these thoughts? And certainly, you know, in the early stages of my career in the corporate environment, and also my early career as a professional coach, you know, it's come up for me and I thought, well, who can I share this with? Because if I share that, I've got these thoughts of, am I good enough? Can't do that, might fail, might get it wrong, whatever it was at the time, then perhaps that will add to other people thinking, well, if she must be thinking that, maybe she isn't as good as we think she is. So really interesting, I think, when we start to sort of unpick it that way. And that's why I've always been very open and authentic, because I think it's really important that, if we are qualified coaches, that, we're open and honest about our own development. Because as you rightly said, even Michelle Obama, the first lady at the time, even she felt she didn't have it all sorted, so it's just so interesting, this whole sort of area. So what is it that we need to look for, Sarah? How do we know? What are we raising our awareness of?
Well, first of all, we're raising our awareness of what's going on for us in our minds. Like, what's that voice saying to us? What's that whispering? Because sometimes we can be tempted just to suppress that and to not pay attention. But actually, when we suppress it, it's still there. That voice of our subconscious is very, very strong. So we need to get curious, like, oh, actually, what is it that you're saying to me? And then pressing that pause button and going, okay, thanks for that. Because again, this voice of the imposter is trying to keep us safe generally. It's trying to keep us safe from taking risks, trying to keep us within our comfort zone, trying to prevent us from doing anything that might be perceived as dangerous. And then we can look and go, well, actually, me doing this talk or me doing a live on Facebook isn't actually dangerous. It's okay, I've got this. We can start to talk back to it. I think another thing to really watch out for is to be mindful about the contexts and the environments and the systems that we're part of as well, because we do know that all of us can be affected by imposter syndrome, but sometimes where we have systems and structures that marginalize certain groups of people, that can increase that feeling of imposter syndrome. And that is not the fault of the individual, that is the fault of the system, the environment, the structure. So for example, if you're a woman and you're a woman of color, in certain systems and environments, it's going to perhaps increase that feeling of imposter syndrome, or any other sort of factors that might marginalize us as individuals. So this is not something that is just the responsibility of the individual to work on, although that's important. We actually, as cultures, as societies, as organizations, need to be looking at how are we making our environments inclusive so that we don't have groups of people who feel like they don't belong and they don't deserve to be here.
That's important, isn't it? That whole sort of feeling of belonging. Everything is all interlinked in some way or another, which I always think is very fascinating. And I love the fact that you mentioned about, having a curious mind, just staying curious longer and sitting with it. Is it always a voice, or could it be sort of, could it show itself in other ways?
That's a really interesting question. For me, it's very much a voice. I very much hear a voice, but you're absolutely right. It can also manifest as a feeling. So it might manifest as that feeling of nervousness, maybe in your stomach, or feeling your heart racing, or feeling your breath increasing. That might be a sign for you of discomfort, of not belonging. And it's important to be able to sort of recognize that feeling. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. I was just looking at the chat box actually, and somebody brought up a question around, is there any data or views on whether there's a difference between men and women? And certainly in my experience, I've found that men are just as what's the word? Men are. They experience as much as women, as I was going to say. I haven't found any distinction personally, but I haven't got any hard data. Do you know if there's any hard data out there on it, Sarah?
Not to my knowledge, and it's a really great question. So I think it's very interesting that imposter syndrome was sort of first coined as a term in 1978 by two psychologists who were studying high-achieving young women at Georgia State University. And with these high-achieving young women, they saw them presenting with symptoms of anxiety, lack of self-confidence, depression, frustration. Now, of course, in 1978, we were sort of at the height of second wave feminism. We were seeing more women entering university. And so I don't think it's a coincidence really that that was identified at that time in relation to women. So the curiosity around it started around the experience of women. And I think perhaps for that reason, the conversation around imposter syndrome has traditionally centered around women. I also think that it's taken time for us to have the conversation around imposter syndrome. And I think it's probably been socially been easier for women to talk about experience of imposter syndrome, and maybe historically, socially, a little bit more difficult for men to talk about it. And it's rare. So when I look, for example, at celebrities who talk about their experience of imposter syndrome, actually it's rarer to find evidence or examples of men talking about it, hence me sharing that example of Tom Hanks, but I don't have a lot more data. But I think, again, it's about us opening up the conversation to find out more, to be curious. And I think that that will change with time as it becomes, you know, a more sort of widespread and accepted conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And creating those safe spaces where actually everybody feels comfortable and enabled to be able to have those conversations. Laura has just popped in the chat box. Her husband talks to her about it, but it's only to her she talks about it with, which sort of shows that safety element, doesn't it? You know, it's a bit like what I was saying earlier. Well, what if I tell somebody in my network? Well, then perhaps they really will think I'm not able to do it. So just really interesting about that whole sort of gender thing. And I think it's across the board, and just that it, as you say, where it started in the 70s was around that time.
Yeah.
So let's have a talk about then managing it. So let's think about, first of all, as a coach for ourselves, so not for our clients, but for ourselves, because we know it affects all of us at some stage or another. How do we manage imposter syndromes for ourselves as a coach?
Yeah, okay. So firstly, as coaches, for us to get curious. So get curious as to what's triggering the imposter syndrome. So it might be a specific situation that triggers it, like doing a Facebook Live or doing a pitch or going to networking. It might be something around that. What triggers that feeling of imposter syndrome? What is it about that situation or that environment that's making us feel that we don't belong here, or that people are going to think that we're not good enough? Secondly, to get curious about what that imposter syndrome is saying to us, to notice it, not to suppress it, to say, hey, thank you, because I hear you, you're trying to keep me safe, and reassuring it, but then saying, but I've got this. And I'll talk about creating a sort of persona in a minute, but it's often really useful. I've used this gremlin when I'm talking about imposter syndrome a lot, because it is like this little voice in my head that needs to come out, and I need to give him a little stroke and go, it's okay. I hear you. I hear you saying, you know, you shouldn't be going off to do that talk. What if you make a fool of yourself? And, you know, my imposter will often say things to me like, Sarah, you'd be better off just sitting at home on the sofa, eating a packet of biscuits, just cancel. There's no need to put yourself through this. And that's what my imposter will say to me. But I can recognize it now and go, okay, thank you for that. Thank you, because I see you're just trying to keep me safe. But actually, I've got this. So recognizing the environment, recognizing what it's saying, and then pressing that pause button and saying, right, what do I want to think instead?
Brilliant. Now, I know that you've done lots of work on imposter syndrome and stuff. So what's the next step then, Sarah, after that? Because you mentioned about a persona.
Yeah, okay. So it's been I always laugh when I talk about this, because I do think I thought it was just me, but it's not just me creating a persona, because when I saw Professor Carol Dweck talking about growth mindset and fixed mindset, Professor Carol Dweck creates a persona for her fixed mindset. So I was like, oh, it's not just me. It's really helped me. I love my gremlin, but it's really helped me to create a persona, a character for my imposter syndrome. Now, my character, my persona, is called Brian. Brian is a middle-aged man. He's very conservative. He goes on holiday to the same place every year, and he really does not approve of me and the stuff that I get up to. So when Brian says to me, hey, Sarah, are you sure you want to come onto Zoom at lunchtime today and talk to 100 and odd people about imposter syndrome? Brian will say that to me, and I'll go, it's all right, Brian, thank you. I know you've got my back. I know you're trying to keep me safe, but I'm going to be okay to do this. So I have quite a nice working relationship now with Brian. Now, I know that's not the case for everybody, and I know this from talking to coaching clients. Brian's, I'm okay now with Brian, but that imposter can be really, really vicious. It can be a really unkind, really, really, really harsh voice. So we do need to be able to go, okay, let's create a character of you. And maybe you're not very nice at all, but rather than just ignoring you or switching you off, just to go, okay, I've got you, I hear you. That's not helpful for me. This is what I choose to think instead. So it's a bit elaborate perhaps, but it really, really works for me, because, Brian is there and always will be there. But the fact that I can engage now in dialogue and go, it's all right, we've got this, we're good, is really supportive.
So what's the benefit then of actually giving this, part of ourselves that is quite unkind to us, but if we reframe it, is trying to keep us safe? What is the benefit of actually giving them a name? Because I used to just say, oh, that's my hyperachiever going, and then just, that type of thing. But I have seen the benefit of actually giving my hyperachiever, quite unkind voice a name and a persona. So what is the benefit, Sarah?
Think it's just so, Sharon, as I've just described, so that we can then engage in a conversation, because otherwise that harsh voice can be something that really feels quite uncontrollable. It can be very, very harsh, very, very unkind. And actually, when we create that persona, we can then talk back to it. We can then start to go, hey, I'm just going to thank you, Brian, but I'm just going to turn down the volume on you a little bit, because I don't need you to be talking to me quite so loudly at the moment. Another thing that we can do, which is a sort of NLP trick, is to actually have a visual representation and say, hey, I see you, and I'm just going to shrink you down. I'm going to take the color out of you. I'm going to take the sharpness out of your image. And then you don't need to have quite so much power in this moment. So I suppose the point of creating a persona is it allows us then to interact and engage on a human level, as opposed to it being some kind of uncontrollable, harsh voice.
And I guess we then disassociate from it a little bit, because we're sort of putting a little bit of distance between ourselves and our unhelpful persona of the imposter syndrome, rather than it actually physically being part of us, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay, so I'm sure there's lots of other stuff, but I'm guessing some of this will wrap over into how, as coaches, we support our clients in taming their imposter syndrome. So if we were then supporting clients, I'm guessing there'd be a very similar approach. So how would we do that? As client, I've got a client, let's just say, and I've come to you and I said, Sarah, my client, I've come to you in supervision. And I said, Sarah, I've got a client that has got incredible imposter syndrome, and I just don't know how to support my client. What would you say?
Yeah. So I think firstly, with clients, often they want to know that they're not alone. Often clients will say that, is this normal? Like, am I the only one who thinks like this? Am I the only one who says these things? So I think, first of all, just allowing space for that conversation and offering that reassurance that you're not alone in this. It's okay to feel like this. It's very normal to feel like this is the sort of the number one. I think secondly, obviously, what we do in coaching is we offer that space without judgment, just to be able to talk about what's going on for us, because we know that feelings of shame grow in dark places. When we bring it out into the light, when we put it onto the coaching table or supervision table, it feels less shameful. And then to have that sense of curiosity. So what's going on? What's that voice saying? Questions that I've brought up during this conversation, like, when do you notice it? When does it come up for you? And then coaching them through, as I have done today in this conversation, not to just shut it down or to suppress it, but actually to pull out, okay, what is it saying to me? So let's go back to that example when I just started teaching and I was telling myself, you don't deserve to be here. If I had the tools then, which I wish that I had, to be able to go, okay, I'm telling myself, or the voice is telling me you don't deserve to be here. How can I then reframe that? Well, actually, let me look at the evidence. So let me look at the fact that actually I have got a degree and I have got a qualification and, all the rest of the evidence. Just as you were saying, Sharon, with the example of your ILM level 7, let me look at the evidence that shows me. And then we start to get a more balanced kind of a nuanced approach. And then having those strategies so that when that voice comes up, when that trigger comes up, we can then go, okay, let me catch this. Sometimes for clients, it's useful to offer them a sort of a physical, like, pattern interrupt. So sometimes it works just to be able to go stop, or to stand up, or to take a step back when you recognize that voice, so that you can then say, okay, let me notice that that's happened. I've stopped it. Let me change my state. Let me change my body language. And now I can start to say, okay, what do I want to think instead? Or what do I choose to say instead?
Lovely. So there's quite a bit there, isn't there? So there's raising awareness, sort of pressing the pause button and listening to what the voice or the feeling is trying to tell us. What is it trying to sort of maybe support us to stay safe from? Creating the persona and looking for the evidence. It's interesting, isn't it? Looking for the evidence around why you deserve to do this thing, be this thing, take the interview, go for the promotion, whatever it might be, coach that client. What would come next, Sarah, if anything?
Yeah, so I think then next is, as I mentioned earlier, recognizing that, is this a pervasive, ongoing voice? Or actually, is this situational? Does this relate to this period of time in which I'm in a growth phase? And then maybe looking back at other periods of growth and going, oh, actually, that thing was really hard when I first started, but actually with time and practice, it did get easier, because sometimes that can help with reframing as well. Another technique that can be really helpful is, as well as creating that persona for the imposter, is then to create another persona for your inner mentor or your inner cheerleader, who can then be that voice, that supportive, positive voice. So again, my persona, my sort of inner cheerleader, is called Aurora. And she is an older, wiser version of me. So she's kind of me, but 20 years in the future. And so when something comes up for me, I'm like, okay, let me go to her. I can see on my timeline where she is. Let me go to Aurora. Aurora, what do you have to say about this? And then I can access that voice of inner guidance, inner wisdom. And it always comes with a real sense of calm as well. So that, again, is maybe an extension of that imposter persona, is actually creating that inner mentor, that inner cheerleader also.
And I'd agree with that, Sarah, because that's been an incredibly powerful activity that I've done with my own clients, in creating the persona of the unhelpful voice, and also creating the persona of, the inner cheerleader, the inner coach, or the more nurturing, sort of side of the voice that we want to listen to. And we can then, go and ask for, what would that advice, what would that inner cheerleader say? Or, what do I need to sort of take on board as a result of these thoughts and feelings? So I think it's incredibly powerful to create both. And what's your thoughts around, you mentioned about looking for the evidence. What's your thought around continuing to record evidence as we stretch and grow and move forward around tackling imposter syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really useful one, because with that evidence, it's really in slow but steady increments helps to support our confidence and self-belief, because over time we start to see, actually, this is the evidence of what I've done, this is the evidence of what I can bring, the value that I can bring. And I think that really helps to support us over time with building evidence. And I think the other thing that sort of goes hand in hand with that, and I think this again is really important for us as coaches, but can also apply to our clients, is to really pay attention to the unique attributes and skills and strengths that we have as individuals. And I think this is really important for coaches, because we're in a very busy online world, and there's a lot of noise there about what a coach should look like, or how much money we should be making, all of that. Like, we all resonate with that. And it can be very, very easy to get caught up in comparison there. I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to be good enough. I'm not like all of those other people. But when we can really tune into, but this is what I bring, this is who I am, this is what draw client, this is why the reason that clients come to me, the more we can build that evidence as well, it really gives us a really strong sense of our own unique identity and the value that that carries.
Yeah, definitely. And Tracy was just asking, do you mean like a journal? And I would say, Tracy, whatever works for you. I use a journal. Sarah and I and a number of the other Coaching Academy trainers, I engaged the I Am Remarkable workshop. And if any of you out there are interested in this type of thing, I would actually say, go and seek yourself out, putting yourself on the I Am Remarkable workshop. It's completely free. And if you just sort of Google I Am Remarkable, you'll see lots of facilitators out there. And one of the things that the I Am Remarkable facilitator actually got us all to do and encouraged us to continue to do was to keep a journal of the reasons why we are remarkable, which sits with what you're saying, Sarah, around what is it that makes me unique. And we often sort of don't celebrate our achievements because we are taught as children that it's show-offy or flashy or whatever. And I think the biggest thing I took away from that workshop, Sarah, I don't know about you, was it's not boasting or flashy if it's based on fact. If it's based on fact, it's not flashy. So I can say, hey, I'm hoping by April, May time that I'll have my level 7 equivalent masters in executive coaching. And I am going to celebrate that. And it is a lot of hard work, but it's also based on fact. So it's not show offy. If we're not putting other people down and we're showing our achievements in a factual way, and also in the service of others, I think it does make a huge difference. Sort of around that. Clara, I think you get a few. I mean, we're looking at master's equivalent here. Just get a few hours under your belt. It's not something we do here at the Coaching Academy. This was an external course that I did, sort of really for the level of work that I'm engaging in at the moment. But really, really great that you're interested in continuing to develop yourself. Yeah, Sarah. Sorry. So what about that for you? Would you agree with that?
With building the evidence and saying if it's evidence-based, then it's not showing off. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I would add to what you're saying there, Sharon, is that actually you don't do anybody any service by keeping it to yourself either. So what was interesting when we did that training together, it's uncomfortable, I think, often talking about our strengths, talking about what makes us special and unique. And it takes practice, it takes challenge maybe to do that. But actually, if we keep that stuff to ourselves, we're not doing anybody any service, because we're not letting potential clients know how we can help them. So it's an important thing, I think, for us all to continue working on, yes, documenting, evidencing the progress for ourselves, but also getting comfortable with the uncomfortable sometimes of sharing that so that we can be of service to other people.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, encouraging our clients to do the same, keeping a little journal, gratitude journal, what went well. We do our win of the week, don't we, as a team, where we share an achievement, a small win of the week, personally or professionally. And all of that starts to raise that lovely sort of documented evidence. So what it can be a journal, but it could be any other sort of format that you choose to be able to use. Sarah, anything else before we start to sort of bring today's conversation to a close that you wanted to share about working with clients?
Yes, there is actually. And Sue Fairbrother, thank you in the chat. You've prompted me here because you've said when you know your power, you can stand in it. And I think work that is related to this is work on body language. So we talked a lot about the imposter and what we do in terms of reframing in the mind, perhaps, but also really important to talk to clients about what's happening in their bodies and literally standing in that power. And again, that's something that I do to prepare myself when I feel nervous ahead of doing a talk or presentation or whatever it is to stand there and practice that grounding, practice that power posing, so that we're opening up our breathing, because it really impacts us sort of mentally and psychologically in terms of how we're able to respond. So offering clients, we haven't really got time to go lots into that today, but offering clients some tools to help them so that when they've got something to prepare for that they know is going to challenge or bring up imposter, that they've got some things that they can do physically to change their state in their bodies, and that then has an enormous impact on what is happening in the mind.
Yeah, definitely. And I think where you've sort of alluded to there is all of the research and the work that Amy Cuddy has done over the years around, sort of stepping into our inner confidence and using power posing and stuff. So if any of you haven't come across Amy Cuddy, fantastic TED talk, have a look at it. All evidence-based research from the University of Harvard. And she still continues today to advocate and do even more research in that particular area. Sarah, thank you. It's been fascinating. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. I always finish by asking all my guests to share something as a learning takeaway or an inspirational message for people here today or listening on playback to take away and action. What would it be for you to share?
I think my message for all of you today is to look back through your history and look at all of those times in your life where you have grown to move through a challenge or to step into a new position or to do something new, and look at how you moved through that journey. Because again, when you look at the evidence of your growth in the past, it really helps to assure you that you can continue to learn and grow in the future.
Oh, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Key takeaway for me, for sure. And Sarah, those people who haven't come across you before, where can they find out more about you?
Oh, thank you. Please do come and connect with us at the Coaching Catalysts. So we're on Facebook, on Insta, on LinkedIn at the Coaching Catalysts, and we offer coaching, training, supervision for coaches, and also mentor coaching for ICF accreditation. So do come and connect with us, say hi. We'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear as well your takeaways from today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Now we've got a couple of minutes before we finish, so I would love you to write down for yourselves what it is your key point to take away for today. Maybe share it in the chat box, and what has been your light bulb moment, what's been your key takeaway. Maybe it's been a new strategy for yourself or for your clients as well. But Sarah, it has been absolutely amazing. I have loved it as ever. Always loved the times that we interact and chat. We always end up chatting about things like this. So it's been lovely to do it and share your expert knowledge in this particular area with everyone here today as well. But from me and from the whole team here at the Coaching Academy, I want to thank you for listening today, whether it be live or on the replay. Thanks so much. Please do ensure you write down what it is that's going to be your key takeaway. And of course, remember to join me next month as I spend the hour chatting to Mike Guard all around AI and coaching. But until then, thanks very much. Have a great rest of your week and go and find those imposter personas out there. I look forward to hearing how you get on. But take care. Have a great day. Bye for now.